All right, so this is a 2.3 unfamiliar text breakdown. So this part of the video is going to focus on looking at the mark scheme, and then hopefully a part 2 or a follow-up video will look at building an unfamiliar text response based on the extract that the exemplars are from. So to get started, when you come into 2.3, you will answer on 3 texts: poetry, fiction, and non-fiction. So fiction refers to an extract from a narrative. So that could be any perspective or any genre, so fiction being a story generally. Non-fiction, this could be kind of almost anything. Biographies, speeches, magazines, newspaper articles, opinion pieces, letter to the editors, forewords, reference sections. There are many, many options. Poetry, I haven't put down there, but that's kind of self-explanatory. It's a poem. They are often New Zealand text or based on New Zealand issues. It is New Zealand exam after all. So being aware of aspects of Kiwiana, places in New Zealand, kind of the basic geography, slang, Kiwi culture. We call it cultural capital. That's really important. So the more New Zealand poems and books and stories that you can expose yourself to, the better off you will find it. You'd be expected with 3 papers in 3 hours in the actual exam to spend 1 hour on this paper, which is roughly 20 minutes per section. So a 5-minute quick read and a 15-minute response. That can be quite time pressured, so it's worthwhile trying to see where you can shave off time in your essays to make up for it. And finally, the question will be an analyse style question, like they all are at level 2. So this is an example of the question. So this is the question that links with the mark scheme that you'll see in the next slides. But ultimately, you could take out the words from this and replace it. So when you get the question, it tells you the text it refers to. The text will have glossed words and it will have information about where the text has come from. And then you'll get the question. So it will be something like this: analyse how the writer explores his connection to the beach setting. So that just has one part. Sometimes they have 2 parts. Then it will have something which will list a couple of the techniques. In your answer, you should include examples of techniques used in the text and explain their effects. That's what you need for achieved anyway. And then they'll list some suggested techniques. So if you're really stuck, just know that these are in there somewhere. These might include, but are not limited to, contrast, personal pronouns, and personification. So the assessment schedule in the following slides is from the 2016 version of it. Assessment schedule is another word for kind of like the mark scheme. It stays the same every year. The only thing that changes is the keywords. So the keywords in the previous question were connection to beach setting, and whatever the question is, they'll change based on that. So basically, know the general things that you're being asked to look at, and you'll know how your question is going to be marked. They aren't trying to trip you up. It's the same things for every question, for every text type. It's just the keywords that change. But it's pretty straightforward. You'll see what I mean in a moment. I know I said it was straightforward, and it doesn't look very straightforward. There are a couple of key aspects. So when I talked about how the keywords will change, you can see here, this is where the keywords are. So explores this connection to the beach setting. So whatever the question is, that's what will be in this part here. So these first part clearly explains, makes links, acknowledges. These all stay the same. So as you can see, these are all very generic, the bottom 4, and the first bit will just link to the question. So if your question said, analyse how the writer shows the relationship between the main character and the whale, that would just be there. So that there would just change. So in this one, it would say, clearly explains how the writer has shown the relationship between the main character and the whale. That's the other bit that changes. So as you can see, it builds up in terms of what you are expected to do at each level. For the mark schemes, you get a mark out of 24 ultimately, and it has a scale, and that decides what your final grade is. So you get marked on each question separately. Each question will get a possible mark out of 8. So that's why it's really important that even if you don't have time to write a full answer, you go back and you let yourself do something like a technique and write a quick sentence, because you can get 1 mark, and ultimately that could be the difference between you failing or you passing. The marking criteria, if you get 7 to 12, it's achieved. 13 to 18 is merit, and 19 to 24 is excellent. So in order to pass under that boundary, you can get 2 N2s and an A3 and still pass overall. So with any of those boundaries, it works the same as long as you get 2 of them and 1 of the other. So if you wanted to get a excellence, you could still get 2 M6s, but 1 E7, and that would bring you over to excellence. And the same obviously goes for merit. So it looks kind of intimidating when you look at it like this. So I'm just going to break it down into some simpler terms in this next slide. So it comes down to how well you do 5 things. So how well you address the question, how well do you analyze, the techniques that you've used and your number of them and your effect of them and your discussion of them, your consideration of the author's purpose and the wider ideas of that, your ability to produce a formal, thoughtful academic response, and your use of evidence to support your argument or build your response or whatever. So it's kind of more like those first 3 probably hold the kind of most weight. Academic writing is important, and obviously you need to use evidence from throughout the text. But these ones are the opportunities for you to produce more insightful or convincing responses. So what does that all mean? What I'm going to do is break down the mark scheme once again, because that can still be quite confusing. So for achieved, you clearly address the question and you use the keywords to do this. You have tried to think about how techniques or language features create an effect that supports the question. So have they used a metaphor to show how they feel about the beach? Some reference to writer's purpose. It might not be particularly developed. You might be just saying something like the writer is trying to show that he feels fondly about the beach. You haven't given it much thought, but you've got a bit of writer's purpose. It could be implied. You might not even have a direct statement that says it. You've tried to use analysis lingo. Therefore, this is significant because, and quotations are used. Ideally, they're relevant to the question. So the slide here would be the ones to try and take note of. So these will help you build a response. You might not have all of these. These really would probably help you build gradually towards a merit response more than anything. This first one here, really important. The writer has shown a connection to the beach setting through metaphor. That will really cement a paragraph. It's very simplistic and it's an easy way of doing that. Through use of metaphor, we are better able to understand the writer's connection to the beach. So those first 2 are really simple. These ones here help to make it more explicit rather than implicit. So this is showing that you understand the writer's purpose. Easy ways to get you out of achieved and into merit, but worth a shot regardless. Try and think of the wider idea. This is significant when we consider. That's probably more of a merit response too. The effect of this one's really necessary. It helps to show whatever. And then these are ways that we can just include evidence. This is highlighted through the quote. This is shown when the writer notes, blah, 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 blah. Easy ways to put your quotations in there and sort of weave them into your response. So I'm just going to read you an extract of an achieved exemplar and talk through it very briefly. So the personification, the power of the ocean, tells me that to try would be foolish, so I just sit there and listen. The writer's purpose is to tell the audience that sometimes the ocean speaks to him, even himself he thinks that it is foolish and he can't believe it. He thinks to himself that he is going insane, but he continues to hear it, so he just sits there and listens. He does not respond, just listens to the ocean. The use of personification makes the ocean do human-like things, like talk, and tries to answer all the narrator's problems. So the bit that I've got in bold here is them showing some link to the question or writer's purpose. So they've done it with explicit the writer's purpose is, which is a really easy way of ensuring that you've addressed it. This is the second paragraph in their response. The first one had a greater connection to the question, which was about the beach, the connection between the writer and the beach setting. This one here shows that the connection is that he thinks he's going insane and he listens to the ocean. Apologies for my typo there, but this is definitely how it was written grammatically. So that's a reference to an achieved exemplar. They've stated the language feature, they've given the example, they've tried to link it to a writer's purpose or an idea. It's pretty basic. Merit, you're starting to analyze a bit more. You're starting to have some depth or detail. You're starting to think more about how the language feature creates an effect. You're trying to think more about how the writer has a purpose. They have an idea, they have a message, they've got something bigger going on. So in the previous one, they sort of just talked about how the writer talks about being at the beach and listening to the waves and kind of feeling like he has a connection with the waves. It's kind of basic. At a merit level, we wanted to try to think about a wider idea or a message. The language becomes more sophisticated at merit that you're trying to use, and evidence is taken from throughout the text. So you're not just taking it all from the first bit or the end bit, you're trying to weave it through from throughout the text. And you might not be using as formulaic of an answer or insertion of quotes. So these are some sentence starters to help there. Initially, the writer explores the connection to the beach. This is later built upon or contrasted when they. So it's showing an awareness that the text is crafted, that initially it might start one way, but it might go a different way. Or if it stays the same, it builds our understanding of something. That's why it's quite helpful to break the text into chunks and see if there are different focuses in each chunk. The use of positively, negatively, nature-associated, connotated language further builds on our connection to the beach as blah, blah, blah. So as you can see, the writing is slightly more sophisticated in these sentence starters. It reflects a greater engagement with the text and is a little bit more sophisticated. The writer has cleverly used metaphoric language. When the writer notes, quote, we are forced to consider ... that this is awareness of a larger message. Ultimately, we are led to consider how humans or how people or whatever, you'll see this in one of the exemplars coming up. This contrasts dramatically to the earlier use of metaphor because, so if you can see the same use of language feature, but it's got a different effect, you would talk about that. The character blank and blank, creating imagery, allowing us to better, so this is where you would put in verbs perhaps. The character reflects and remembers, creating nostalgic imagery, allowing us to better consider how we think about things in the past, for example. This is an extract of a merit exemplar, so this is one paragraph out of about 3 that they wrote. In this text, the writer explores his connection to the beach setting by opening all of his senses to the beach, taking the scenery and letting it remind him of his childhood. In line 9, the writer uses a metaphor to support this idea. It draws me in slowly as I sit here alone. This metaphor helps the idea that he was opening his senses to the beach. This metaphor describes how he was taking the scenery and experience of the beach. He lets the scenery take his thoughts back to childhood. In lines 1 to 6, he describes going to the sea when he was young, and the writer describes his parents loving the sea as well. We were going to live by the sea, but we never did. In this line, the writer talks about how the unfulfilled dream. This strengthens his connection to the beach through happy and sad memories. So they've got some consideration of a contrast that exists. They've got up here where they talk about the metaphor. They've kind of explained how the metaphor does it in specifics. They've considered a little bit of a purpose in terms of how it's letting it remind him of his childhood, which is a wider idea. And they've got really clear and explicit use of keywords from the question and multiple examples. And this, as I said, is just one paragraph and it builds. So to get an excellence, it is difficult. You have to reflect upon the wider imagery and ideas that are shown. So this is your ability to pick up what is being shown. Not just about the beach, but what else can we get from it? This is connections to nature, society, human condition, human experience, human emotion. This here shows that you've got a deeper reflection about how language is used to create an effect and how it has been used to place the reader. They have recognised the author's purpose in their use of language, their use of crafting and structure. The language is academic and formal, reflecting a significant understanding and confidence in this. And evidence used is selected to build an argument rather than just listing any language feature that's been found. It is built to that level. I haven't put sentence starters for excellence because it's less formulaic, it is more personal voice, and it doesn't really have sentence starters. Whereas you can have sentence starters to get achieved and build you up to merit. In order to get excellence, you kind of just have to be quite good. It's as simple as that, unfortunately. But I will read an excellence exemplar to finish this so that you can kind of understand what it looks like. So same as the other one, this is just one extract from a much larger response. There were 2 or 3 other paragraphs after this. Once again, same use of keywords in the sentence just to cement it and anchor it. The writer explores his connection to the beach setting by comparing memories of his time at the beach from his childhood to his time at the beach now. The quote, "I remember that summer seemed better then," is used to show the difference the writer feels about the beach. The preposition then is past tense and used to show his connection to the beach when he was younger. The writer states the summers were better then, showing us that he has grown older, that as he has grown older, the excitement of a summer at the beach has diminished. This is common when revisiting places where you spent your childhood. What used to be big, new, and exciting now seems small and insignificant. However, the place is the same. The only thing that has changed is you. So the second part here that I have put into bold is because this is insightful. They're reflected to a wider human experience. This is common when revisiting places where you spent your childhood. They're reflected on how it was like this, but then it's not actually that way anymore. And then ultimately, the way that they're reflected, that it is the change of you as opposed to the change of the place. To expand on this, to be more insightful, they might consider how nature stays the same, how the setting stays the same in terms of the waves and the animals and the sand, and the feeling like that stays the same, but everything about him changes. So that would be able to create the connection between man and nature, which is quite a thoughtful and insightful comment. The bit that they've got here, the writer states the summers were better then, is a bit of weaving into it. They have just used sentence styles like the quote and the writer states. They haven't necessarily weaved them exactly in, but they've still got evidence. It's still selective. Here, where they focus on the preposition and the tense of the preposition, shows a high level of analysis and consideration of technique. The full exemplars are on the NZQA website. So these are the 2.3 2016 exemplars. If you would like to read the full thing, engage an understanding of how an entire response looks. You're generally given 2 pages to build your response, and you'd probably use 1.5 to 2 pages to produce more of a merit or excellence response. Ultimately, you should have at least 2 aspects referenced, 2 different language features, 2 different quotes to get into that achieved. And to get into higher level thought, you kind of want to have basically 3 paragraphs that look at how the text develops, changes, or explores the question, and you want to have at least 1 example in each of those. As long as you can pick up multiple aspects that are showing you something, you'll be fine. The question gives you some language features. You can talk about structure, language features, diction, which is word choice, and narrative perspective can be used at times as well. So hopefully that gives you a very basic and very quick rundown on the mark scheme, some sentence starters, and what you're being asked to look at. Hopefully this is vaguely helpful. Thank you.